Hello, I'm back with Blue Review, and since I did a Thanksgiving special and a Christmas special, I'm going to do a Valentine's Day special. Um, I'm listening to a 1 hour remix of Paco Bell Canon in D, which might be my favorite romantic-ish, emotional uh, Baroque music selection. Um, I am a doomed romantic, incurable, man. Um, a lot of my stories are about romance and all kinds of unconventional pairings and tragic pairings, and sometimes successful. Successful, albeit in a world kind of gone mad, which kind of, if you're having a relationship now and it's successful, it's still going to feel pressure because right now our world is certainly gone mad. So I picked 5 films out of my Blu-ray library that I think kind of exemplify some of the qualities I enjoy in this kind of story. Um, and I guess I'm just going to knock them out one by one. I'm going to focus in on the romantic angle, the couple, the coupling, or in some cases triangle, I guess. Um, and what's at the heart of that and how it's portrayed. Of course, these movies have other qualities too, other formal qualities, which I might touch on. But I want to go ahead and do this. So there's an obnoxious ad because YouTube on my TV still shows ads. So I'm hoping as soon as it's over, we'll get back to the Paco Bell and I'll be kind of in the mood. This is Tristana with Catherine Deneuve by Louis Buñuel. This particular Blu-ray is on Cohen Group. This was one of the first Blu-rays I ever owned, and it was an important purchase to me because I'd had a videotape that had meant a lot to me. The movie meant a lot to me, and I had an old Video Searcher Miami, pretty good print for them, and loaned it to a friend named Cara. She loaned me Detroit Rock City, telling me that I would like it. Well, I think I got the bum end of that deal. So I never got Tristana back. And Detroit Rock City is definitely one of the worst films I've ever seen. It's up there somewhere. So I was deciding to wait. It wasn't coming out on DVD in Region A, Tristana. So finally, early in my Blu-ray collecting career, I wasn't really collecting. I had a Blu-ray player, which I mainly played DVDs on, and a handful of Blu-rays, and of course some other region stuff. It was a region-free player. So I bought a few that were really special to me that were coming out, and that was really all I would do back then. I just couldn't make the commitment or financially to Blu-ray, and now I've kind of broken up financially with Blu-ray after making that commitment. It's going to be a while before I can purchase anything at all Blu-ray wise, but I've got a lot to catch up on. Still a lot of items back here. I just straightened them up and refiled them. I've been collecting a stack of ones that I've been talking about on here. So let me go back. Tristana. This was produced by the Hakim brothers. They also produced Buñuel's classic Belle de Jour. It was 3 years earlier in 1967, also with Catherine Deneuve. This movie features Fernanda Rey and Franco Nero. It was made in 1970. It was actually nominated for the Academy Award for Best Foreign Film, but it didn't win. It's a tragic movie. Basically, Catherine Deneuve is kind of a innocent girl named Tristana, and she has a kind of a wretched stepfather, and he's a real character. He's like anti-clerical, whatever society. He's like an anarchist, and he's like, I sell all my antiques to survive, but at least I don't have to work. And he's kind of like Buñuel in some ways, but Buñuel's not quite as much of a bastard. I hoped he wasn't as much of a bastard as Don Lope or whatever. That's the Fernando's character turns out to be. This is a really, it really has to do with possessiveness and jealousy and part of Tristana's philosophy, if you want to call it that, or maybe her naivety. I don't know. She tells the kind of maid character, at some point in the movie that If it comes down to two things, even if it's something simple as two little peas left over from a meal, that's how she illustrates it. She's going to look at them both and she's going to choose one might be slightly better than the other. And that's kind of what she thinks she does, but people watching may not agree. Her choices are a little baffling, but I think they're driven by her torment and not understanding a lot of things. Basically, that she doesn't understand how possessive Don Lope is and that he has a sexual romantic thing for her. It's not like a daughter, but he controls her financially. He controls what she does. But she meets this artist played by Franco Nero, one of my favorite actors. And I have to say, their romance, I might start crying during some of these, so bear with me. Their romance is really beautiful. It's I don't know, it's like she's finally liberated from Lope, the time she'll go see him. And he's very passionate and young and fiery, and kind, and creative. He's all the things that Don Lope kind of isn't. Except they're both kind of outside of society, I guess you could say. Um, these are all outsider characters. Though Don Lope has some sisters who are like these old rich hags, and it's kind of funny because he's lambasting them in public. These elderly stuck up women and asking them for money, and then of course just as an offhand remark, he's like, that's my sisters, and it's like okay. But Buñuel's kind of sense of humor is kind of like that. It's kind of be subtle, but hilarious when you get it. This movie, however, is somewhat humorless overall. The joy in it is there's not a lot of joy in it except in the affair between Tristana and the artist. But then Tristana gets ill, and her man, I really wish I could remember the name of his character after all this time, Franco Nero's character. But basically, huh, yeah, basically, she needs Lope. I can't remember if I do believe he had forced himself on her before she met the artist. So there was a consummation of this kind of obsession. And he made her think it was kind of normal. He's like, I'm your father and your lover, your husband, your father. So Franco helps her break free, but when she gets ill, she doesn't know who else to turn to, and he doesn't have much money. So he goes to Lope earnestly and says, look, I know they had a tussle in the street. That's really a beautiful, beautiful scene. I should have covered that, but alas. And Tristan ends up having to have one of her legs amputated. And she won't go back with Mr. Nero's character. It's pretty tragic. She almost blames him for taking her to Lope, like he was testing her or trying to get rid of her. Again, he's like, of course not. She's misunderstanding everything now, and she's gone through these traumas, and she's becoming unreasonable. She can't. She has to make this choice, she thinks, between these two men, and she chooses Lope. She decides to stay with him, and he takes care of her, him and the maid, and she hobbles around and has I think a crutch or a cane, and has a depressing view. But then she starts to get pleasure from tormenting Lope, like taunting him with sex and withholding and insulting him, insulting his age and his infirmities, and she becomes very cruel to him. But it's revenge because he destroyed her innocence and he took her great love away. So you never see Nero again, but so that's the frustrated love. The kind of twisted love is Lope's and Tristana's, and it ends with a kind of surreal montage where she's been dreaming that Lope is head is swinging from a bell tower. It's the bell. And his infirmities kind of start to catch up with him, and he becomes more dependent on her. And finally, well, uh, Tristana may end up being free after all, but at what cost, right? So, anyway, this is incredible. Powerful movie. It can be very understated, like the first time you see it. Some of the scenes, it's not quite as showy as Belle de Jour. There's a lot of dialogue, and the surreal humor is there, and the satire of society certainly. But he's homed in on human relationships as his vehicle for those concerns. So anyway, I recommend that one. That's one of my favorites. Wow. Okay, here's one: The Night Porter by Liliana Cavini, and I'm going to give two in a row that are kind of themed this way. I had a lady that I was very close to who had seen this movie because she was involved in the dominance and submission, slave master lifestyle, and she actually wanted to kind of pull me in that direction with her, but albeit in a monogamous relationship. And that's the woman that I was engaged to that I speak of endlessly. And this was one of the movies I happened to ask her, have you seen this one? If you're wanting to get into these strange love affairs and this power dynamic kind of thing. And she said yes, she really liked it. And the next one will be the same. This is a Charlotte Rampling, and she plays the young lady who comes to a hotel in Europe in the, I guess, mid to late 1950s. The movie came out in the early 70s, of course. And she's married, and the guy who works in the hotel she recognizes, played by Dirk Bogarde, and he was a Nazi who was one of the people who held her in a concentration camp in the early 40s when she was like in probably her mid to late teens, and they had a relationship. Well, I mean, it was ostensibly him tormenting her, but she, for whatever reason, she kind of came to enjoy being his slave. And what you see now, these years later, is he is not interested in being a Nazi anymore. He refutes Nazism because some of the old Nazis are in touch with him. And, they, of course, are circumspect. They don't want to be detected. So he's getting a little sloppy here, thinking of approaching one of his, victims, one of the camp survivors. But he's totally in love. He's smitten. It's tragic. Despite the utterly politically incorrect premise and the power dynamic, which you're not really sure. Well, that's the thing, I mean, sometimes someone's conditioned into something and it may become something that is a sexually arousing thing, even though it was intended to hurt them originally. And perhaps in the context of another relationship, they can have a non-consensual fantasy life. And I think that's what a lot of the BDSM is too, a safe way to have those kind of fantasies enacted. So the night porter, Bogart he's touching, man. He's like, she was my little girl, and he means that in every way. Like she was a young girl, and he took care of her. He kept her from being killed by the other Nazis, and she was his little girl, as in like his Lolita, his lover. And now she's a woman, and he's just doesn't care about anything else. He wants her back, and they finally begin an affair. And there's really not a whole lot of kind of sadomasochistic actions in their affair. It's a little more straightforward, or a little more, as S&M aficionados might say, their lovemaking is a little more vanilla. But there's nothing wrong with vanilla if it's, it can be delicious. So, but unfortunately, these Nazi fucks, they determine that she needs to be killed. She's a witness. And they try to run away. Well, first they hold themselves up in a room up in the hotel for days, and they start running out of food, and they're starving, they're delirious, but they're still kissing and making love, albeit very weakly, taking all their effort to really, get intimate at all. It's not like a big graphic sex fest, but it's kind of pitiful, and it's more romantic than erotic. And then when I say that again, we're talking about doomed romance and tragic, the kind of things you can see in fiction that maybe you wouldn't be comfortable with in reality. But in fiction, because of the drama, it's compelling. Another one I adore. So along these same lines, Secretary, by Steven Shainberg, 2002, I believe, with Mr. James Spader from Crash and Maggie Gyllenhaal from Donnie Darko. Naming some kind of artsy films they were in, but right shortly before this, they've all been in all kinds of things. James Spader was Ultron in the MCU. That's pretty cool. And Maggie was also in a superhero movie. She was Rachel Dawes in Dark Knight. But I'm sure guys know all this. So anyway, Secretary. This one's pretty beautiful. It's a girl, a young woman who has been in a mental hospital for a while, and she comes out and she starts hurting herself again, as a way of releasing her feelings. She had been cutting herself, so she burns herself with an iron. It's a wince-inducing scene, man, and it's really sad. But then she finally, to get her mom off her back, I think more than anything, and prove she can do society. She goes to work as a kind of menial secretary in this rich lawyer's office, Edward Gray, and her name's Lee Holloway. And Edward Gray, he's like real anal retentive, and he wants things done a certain way all the time. He's very tense, and he begins to dominate her personality-wise. And after a while, the dominance begins to turn her on. She gets a date with a guy she knew. He's kind of a hippie nerd guy played by Jeremy Davies. And they actually have sex, but she feels nothing. And it's boring to her. And it's true, because it's not just the sex is boring. It's just he's boring and he's conventional. And she's craving someone else, and maybe someone who she sees as a master figure, someone who has power, someone who's kind of mysterious, that she can divine what they're about, and they can take hold of her life, which is fractured. But again, she becomes deeply in love with him, and finally he begins going through a lot of role playing, and only a little of it becomes overtly sexual. But a lot of it's tying up and bondage and orders of things to do, and a total master slave kind of scenario. So she's totally into it. As you can see here, she's delivering his paper on her knees. So Spader, though, is still a little cool. Like when he lets go sexually and emotionally for the first time, he's embarrassed by it. He's like, okay, I didn't mean to go that far. But of course, she's been wanting that, and so then he kind of cuts her off and he leaves. And she is going to wait for him. And she like chains herself or handcuffs herself. Somehow she is stuck to his desk at his office. And she waits for him for like 2 or 3 days. And, she urinates on the floor. People come in to visit her and can't reason with her. And you're not sure, is this guy just a total callous asshole, Edward Gray? Is he testing her? He is testing her. But she's up for it. And you think she isn't, and you think it's going to be humiliating. You think a million things are going to happen. But amazingly, when he finally comes, he treats her with total tenderness. It gets very vanilla, and he washes her and bathes her and cleans her from being, dirtied in that room. And they're a couple. It's pretty beautiful. It's pretty sad. I might cry. I mean, it's not sad. It's just very, I don't know. It's like when you grow up a lot of times, like, I don't know, in America or in the South or whatever the conditions I grew up in, you think that everything is kind of, there's these boxes everyone fits into, and that, love and passion and sexual arousal have to be in these certain contexts. Maybe religion plays into that, social programming, school, parents, etc. Uh, Maybe early relationships you have that are with people who aren't as open-minded or uninhibited as you, and they make you feel kind of guilty for having these other fantasies, other feelings. But it can happen within a relationship. I mean, and I'm proof of it because we came into that realm. I came into that realm with my last two lovers, but I more so with my ex-fiance. Though even at that, we didn't go nearly as far as secretary. Though we might have. I think that's something that she wanted, and to be honest, I wanted it too. And I was kind of I was deprogramming these inhibitions. It's just I was doing it slowly, because I wanted a situation of trust and safety, and so did she. So maybe this is a very, very personal thing, and I've told very few people about this lifestyle part of our situation, but maybe it gives you even more idea of why it's been so difficult, so tragic. When someone gives their self over to you and says, "I'm yours," and like, own me, you're my master, and you're like, "You sure this is what you want?" And they're like, "Well, hell yeah," and that was a different kind of woman. These last few women that I knew, they were different than the other women I'd known. And, there are actually a lot of women out there like this, and a lot of them are cool, and a lot of them are polyamorous, and some of them are monogamous, and some of them are married. And, it's really, things are not what we're told they are, when we're kind of plopped into this world and given our, little programming. I love this movie. It's a beautiful modern romantic movie. It's just another one that's weird and romantic. So here's one from the 60s, Contempt, Le Mépris by Jean-Luc Godard. This has the lovely Brigitte Bardot, along with Jack Palance, of all people, and Michelle Piccoli, who's been in a million movies and died recently. So they were looking for a vehicle for Bardot, and this was going to be Godard's. I think it's his first color film, though. It's one of his earlier films, technically speaking, but it's his first widescreen film. And I don't know if it had a bigger budget, but certainly it has bigger production values. However, like everything Godard did back then, it's very subversive. So he was taking this kind of classical filmmaking formal style and rendering some of his usual concerns. And Godard, to me, seemed very concerned with a couple of things in his early movies. One was obviously the anarchic, political, socio-political, and artistic aesthetic methods that he utilized. Just break it apart and just break cinema apart. Do whatever. There's there's jump cuts and there's sudden letters on the screen and blurbs, and then there's like a cut to something else, and then there's something absurd, and then there's something kind of serious, and then someone's reading poetry. And then there's like a gangster movie. His stuff is amazing, that early period, and this was like an experiment, I think, for him, and it's really successful because he does subvert the visual style, and it's kind of about filmmaking too, because Michel Piccoli is a film writer who's kind of struggling, and he gets recruited by this American producer played by his name's Prokosh, played by Jack Palance, who's kind of an arrogant, egotistical ass. And they're trying to make a film that's kind of an epic film. It's like the Odyssey. It is the Odyssey, Odysseus' story, And Fritz Lang is going to be the director. Fritz Lang in his older years, and Fritz Lang plays himself. Piccoli seems like a guy he's insecure. He's very intellectual and artistic in his mind. He likes being around those kind of people. He enjoys Fritz Lang's company and his stories. He's stimulated by the movie, but um, he's probably insecure because he has this younger, beautiful wife, and he's supporting her. Um, he makes a lot of decisions that are wrong because he kind of misreads her, and it's kind of by extension women themselves, or at least in Godard's films. That was the other concern I was going to mention. It's about women and romance, and they usually end tragically in those early movies, like Masculine, Feminine, and Breathless, My Life to Live, and all powerful endings. And this one, Palance is just doggedly, hitting on Brigitte Bardot, and she is what's her name, Camille? Yes, and husband's Paul. So Camille just kind of blows off Prakash, but at one time, Paul assumes that she won't. They're splitting up to meet somewhere. The kind of entourage, small little entourage that's around the film, like the secretary and Fritz Lang, and they, Prakash wants her to go with him, and she does, but only because Paul doesn't stop her. He actually encourages her to go. So over time, we find out that that day was a turning point in their relationship, because she starts to basically be cold to him overnight and tell him that's more or less over. She won't tell him why. Why? I don't understand. And this is something a lot of us go through in relationships, when someone seemingly suddenly changes their mind about you in the middle of a serious relationship, and you're left wondering, and you can't get the answers. And sometimes there are no answers, and there are no whys. Those are the sad realities that I've learned. In a story, though, they're gonna tell you why. But when you find out, it's one of those things that, like, if you were him and you went back and tracked through your memory, what moment did you stop loving me? What moment did you lose respect for me? And that was an important thing for her, and that's an important thing for a lot of women, to respect their man. And it was that moment when he let her go with Prakash, and he didn't kind of stand up like, this is my woman, quit hitting her on her. She's coming with me. And because he was insecure, he thought he erred on the side of fear and reservation, and also partially to impress people he's working with. And she sees that almost like prostitution. Consequently to this, she actually does begin an affair with Prakash. So, the bad boy wins out. Or does he? The ending, to me, is not so much tragic as it's hilarious, because it's karma. But it's not to be cruel to Camille. It's just, you see where Paul could have done better, redeemed himself in her eyes. And the more he talks, the more he digs himself in with her. But he doesn't know what she wants. She's helpless, and he's helpless. And she never makes the effort, though, to make things right. And instead, she goes over to the other dude. And so that's where the karma comes in handy. It's like, it's not so much that Camille changed her feelings about him, or that she was going to leave him because she didn't respect him anymore. It's the fact that she did that, and then she went over to this other guy who she was criticizing, who's kind of like the antithesis of Paul. At least that's the way I kind of read it. I mean, some of you guys may see that a little bit differently. These are just scattered thoughts I've had over the years with this movie. So anyway, this is on Studio Canal Blu-ray. It's real beautiful. By the way, that Night Porter was in the Criterion collection. Secretary is just kind of it's a generic, no, it's Lionsgate. Yes, a generic company. So Contempt, yeah, it's tragic. It's not as, it doesn't like bring me to tears, but it makes me feel horrible for Paul, and kind of horrible for her too. And yeah, glad for Fritz Lang though. So this last one is probably the one that means the most to me, and is probably the most powerful of these, albeit maybe in a more understated way to some people. But it's very appropriate with me playing this Baroque music, this pachelbel canon in the background. And that is a film by my second favorite director of all time, my number one being David Lynch. But it's by Wong Kar-wai, and this is a Criterion, In the Mood for Love. This movie's amazing. I read a quote that said Wong Kar-wai that I can't remember it now, but it's paraphrasing, the world's most romantic filmmaker. That was it. And yeah, Wong Kar-wai, I have an enormous affinity for. He's a Cancer like me. He's a sensitive guy and a creator. And his kind of alter ego in several of his movies, Totally Young, he's also a short Cancer male, just like me. And I don't share birth dates with either one of them, but alas. And the things they produce together, especially this loose trilogy with Days of Being Wild, in which Leone's character is kind of minor, and then this, and then 2046. 2046 is my favorite film of all time, and it's going to be part of the Wong Kar-wai set coming up from Criterion, which I think is going to have this in it too, but maybe not since it's a separate thing. But it's definitely going to have a whole ton of movies. 2046 will be the first time on Blu-ray, and I'm excited. I'm hoping I dig myself out of a tunnel financially by the time the April half-off sale of Criterion at Barnes & Noble rolls around. I have till the end of April because I have to own that set. If anyone wants to donate or buy it for me, please do. In April, it'll be half off, so it'll be $100 instead of $200. So, In the Mood for Love, it's early 60s Hong Kong, and Chow Mal-Wan, our main guy, played by Tony Leung, him and his wife come to live in this hotel. He's a struggling writer. He's kind of a buttoned-up kind of guy. You know, he's kind and polite. There's tension with his wife. We don't exactly see all of what it is. It kind of unfolds gradually, unveils itself. But Maggie Cheung is also, her character's name always kind of stumps me because it's a little more interesting because there's another character with this name on purpose in one of this trilogy. Su Lijin. So Lijin also is married, and same thing. You know, it's kind of like in Peanuts where the kids hear the teachers going, wonk, 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 you never see them, or, you know, Cooper talking to Diane. It's like they're there. You might see like their leg or their arm, and you might hear something, but you never really fully get a scene with either of the spouses. You just get the viewpoints of these two, and also how they interact. And their interaction it's platonic, but it builds romantically. And the way he does this is, well, first off, the 60s look, like all of his movies, looked incredible, but he exploits that era, that production design, and Maggie's look, and she's wearing those tight dresses and kind of almost mini skirts or one-piece dresses and the big hair, bouffant, and, you know, she said in interviews pretty uncomfortable to get into that stuff. And I think she said her, Zhang Yi, but anyway. But she looks fabulous. She always looks fabulous. But this is a kind of different look for her. She's definitely playing a different part, and she's got the chops, you know, to do it. He uses these techniques like music. He uses a lot of Baroque music and classical kind of snippets, and some other things thrown in there, and some pop music, and he of the era, I believe. But he uses music and cinematography and the emotions etched on these people's faces and the body language, because like this is like a lot of his movies is according to the people interviewed for this movie, it didn't have a complete shooting script, and he was rarely used a complete shooting script. So he takes what David Lynch does of working this shit out on the set when an idea comes to him, and the actors have to respond like immediately. Ideally, they don't always, and they're not always able to but Lynch employed that a lot on Twin Peaks: The Return, and Kyle MacLachlan was always able to improvise, and a lot of times with that first take they kept. But in this one, yeah, there's improvisation and there's some dialogue, obviously, but you know, the movie is in chronological order, unlike 2046, which jumps all around through the 60s with Chow Wan. But this one's more or less in chronological order, and but this is, obviously like most movies, shot out of order, and they flesh certain scenes out, and the actors brought a lot to the table. The actors embodied these characters. So there's a real heavy collaborative, and then Christopher Doyle, the cinematographer, is really, he's not from Hong Kong, but he is one of the most incredible cinematographers who worked consistently in Hong Kong. And Wong Kar-wai was one of his biggest collaborators. He shot most of Kar-wai's best looking movies and best movies. And this is no exception. And you kind of get swept up, and the passion is kind of under the surface. It's very romanticized. I mean, in other words, this affair is mostly going on in Chow Wan-'s head, but he believes she feels the same way, kind of, and he's trying to press her, but he's not like dramatically like, "I know you love me." It's again, he's afraid of making a misstep. These are people who are kind of afraid because of they're the way they are in society. They're married and they're kind of middle class, and they're Asian. They have a different culture about this stuff, even though Hong Kong obviously was more cosmopolitan, being a British colony. But what I'm trying to say is that they're not the kind of people who are just going to like say "fuck you" to their spouses and jump in bed. And so it could be frustrating for some people. This kind of story I've seen, that basic idea I've seen done before, and it usually frustrates me. I'm like, just get to it, man, and share those emotions. And this one doesn't frustrate me. I feel as though that's the whole tragedy, is it could only go this way. It can only be unrequited. Let me take that back. It's not unrequited. She does love him too. It can only be unconsummated. And that's the engine really that drives 2046 is this longing, this loss, this mistake, this turn in the road that wasn't taken. And so he begins using a variety of other women as surrogates for Su Li Zhen, and they're all different from each other. He's more of a cad now. He's been hurt. He's divorced, and he's kind of being a playboy, and in 2046. And he has these different affairs, and different. They represent different elements, different things he's attracted to in women, maybe aspects of himself. But they can't quite fill the hole with Su Li Zhen. But they do feed his art, and so in that movie, he's not just like a journalist or a writer. I think he's a journalist in The Mood for Love. I'm pretty certain. He's a creative writer in 2046, and then he becomes a science fiction, fantasy, and wuxia martial arts writer. That's incredible, and the science fiction story is fleshed out. 2046 is the if I recall correctly, 2046 is like it's the room that Su Li Zhen is in the hotel, or 47 is the room. One of them is, I believe, his room, and one of them is her room. So that's always gonna, yeah, it's 2040, maybe 2047. I get mixed up because he doesn't. I'll explain it quickly, and not spoil all of the other movie for you, but in his story, 2046, it implies it takes place in the year 2046, and it's almost like another dimension, another place, like you can get to, like somehow transport to in some esoteric fashion, or maybe interdimensional travel or a rocket ship or whatever, and that city is kind of 2046, and it is visualized in CGI, and it has characters and everything, and they show the characters played by the same actors who are playing in the Chow Moan level of 2046. And of course, they're playing, he's based his characters on them, and they're in there, and he's kind of using that as an outlet. He uses 2046, which becomes like the story name too. He uses it to get out all these feelings. And that movie is resonant to me because that's what I do in my stories. I do a lot of the exact same things for a lot of the exact same reasons as Chow Moan and have in the past. And I think I connect with that character more than any character in any film. More in 2046, but In the Mood for Love is still a classic, coming full circle. And it was renowned and got a lot of awards, and with good reason. 2046 fell under the radar, but this is a brilliant setup for it. And again, this is another tragic kind of romance where you're hoping they'll be together. It's a little odd. In this case, it's odd because they're kind of repressed, and it's almost the opposite of Secretary, where there's going over the beyond the pale here with experimentation, and there's a core of love within it. Whereas in this one, the love's there, and they're like kind of they're buttoned up, but it's still like powerful. So yeah, that's my 5 Valentine's Day movies. I hope you'll, I don't know, watch one of them, all of them. Let me know if you're a fan of any of those, or if they just kind of suck, or you think that I'm all wrong about them and they're not even really love stories at all. So that's possible. Any interpretation is valid. I'm learning on the internet. I'm a little sarcastic. Wanted to say hi to my Valentine this year is Bree, and thank you for everything. And my good buddies, and I'll be back with some more videos. I'll definitely be tackling WandaVision when it wraps up, and some other things. So stay tuned. I wanted to knock this out real quick before the day was over. So take care. Thank you. I appreciate everything.